So one of my favorite video game series of all time are the Ace Attorney games. The reason I haven't really done any content about them is because if I'm going to talk about these games, I want to do them justice. Yeah, sorry, I know, bad joke. Anyway, whenever I've got some free time, I really like to sit down, usually once a year, and replay these games. But this year was a little bit different. I saw some posts online about an upcoming Square Enix title that was developed and produced by a visual novel legend. I'm talking about Paranormasight, The 7 Mysteries of Honjo, which was released in March of 2023. While it's definitely less of a courtroom drama and more so a supernatural whirlwind spanned across a few days and nights, there's some elements of the game I recognize from my time with Ace Attorney, and new features in visual novel design I came to really appreciate. Paranormasight isn't a perfect game though. I feel like a second title's development needs a little extra time. With all that said, I think comparing this game to an acclaimed series like Ace Attorney will help to put things in perspective for those who are on the fence about the game, or even players who haven't even heard of this game. Let's begin. Paranormasight, The 7 Mysteries of Honjo released worldwide on March 8th, 2023 on Steam, and the 9th for Nintendo Switch, iOS, and Android. Developed by Zine and published by Square Enix, the game definitely came out of left field in a few different ways. As a developer, Zine has been involved in all sorts of games, from Katamari Damacy to Sakura Wars, to even helping Capcom create the Luigi's Mansion arcade cabinet, which I thought was kind of cool. Most of their work with Square Enix has been as additional staff on mainline Final Fantasy titles, and even developing the Trials of Mana remake. At first glance, neither company seems super involved in the visual novel world until you learn about Paranormasight's producer, Takanari Ishiyama. Now, before Ishiyama joined Square Enix, he worked as a sound designer for Konami, notably on Metal Gear Solid, as well as visual novel adjacent dating sim Tokimeki Memorial, before eventually leaving for racing game dev Genki sometime between 1999 and 2001. As Genki began developing more mobile games, Ishiyama would begin his desired direction into game planning, working on different projects like RPGs and mini-novels. Now, Ishiyama was a big fan of visual novel games in his younger days, having played lots of ADV games from famous titles like Portopia Serial Murder and more obscure titles like Misty Blue, both published by Enix. It's fitting then that the copyright for Paranormasight was also filed on the same day as a copyright for a potential new Portopia game. Around the same time Ishiyama joined Genki, Capcom was developing and would eventually release their smash hit visual novel series, Gyakuten Saiban, which we know as Ace Attorney in the Western world. The unanticipated resurgence of ADVs, or adventure games, in the early 2000s thanks to titles like Ace Attorney, created a perfect storm for Ishiyama to use his experience as a player and developer to craft the Detective Rysouke Kibukawa series. It's almost funny to think about how much Takanari Ishiyama liked visual novels once you realize the main character of this series isn't even a detective, but a game scenario writer like Ishiyama. The Kibukawa games are from the POV of writer Masao Ikurumi, who helps Detective Ryosuke and his assistant Izuna solve cases. Ishiyama would create the first 10 titles in the series, including the DS game, before moving on to Square Enix in 2005. Genki would continue making Kibukawa games until around 2012. When another publisher, Gmode, began porting mobile titles to Nintendo Switch and PC, Ishiyama's old Detective series was one of the most requested ports. The first 10 Kibukawa games were released on Switch in 2021 and then ported to PC in 2023. The interest in these re-releases prompted Square Enix to greenlight a new project for Ishiyama. Once again, another opportunity had arisen for him to begin crafting a new adventure. Only this time, he decided to lean into the supernatural for a little bit of help, and Paranormasight was born. Before we get into the next section, I just want to mention that a lot of this information was compiled by another creator named Bowl of Lentils. They not only created the original thread that pushed me to play the game and review it, but also made some of the information about Ishiyama a lot easier to find. Definitely go support them and what they do for game history preservation. Now let's jump into the game itself. Paranormasight's story revolves around the 7 Mysteries of Honjo, a collection of folktales that have taken a life of their own. Through nefarious means, someone activates an ancient ritual known as the Feast of Shadows, which brings these tales to life through curse echoes, wayward memories of pain. If someone experiencing emotional pain visits a location of a mystery where the curse echo will appear, the echo afflicts the person with the curse, giving them a curse stone, and thereby making that person the bearer of the curse. All these mysteries revolve around an urban legend known as the Rite of Resurrection, a process in which you could be able to revive someone if you're able to collect enough soul dregs, which is energy pulled from a dead person. You give people a bunch of curse stones and they start killing each other, and that's how you get to solving murders. Activating curses. Spirit mediums don't seem so weird now, do they? After the initial story setup, you're going to be playing as 3 main characters. Yako Sakazaki, who's a young woman still attached to her deceased best friend, Harue Shigima, a mother who's trying to revive her son killed in a kidnapping, and Tetsuo Tsutsumi, a detective experienced in paranormal affairs who's trying to put an end to all this supernatural chaos. You'll be moving around the area of Honjo, a precursor to the modern Sumida ward of Tokyo, talking with different people and examining different areas Phoenix Wright style, doing all you can to stop the Rite of Resurrection and its potential bloodshed. It's less about trying to find contradictions and more about uncovering the truth behind this mystery. The game is set up as a voyeur-like experience. You're essentially watching over the game like an omnipresence, seeing all the interactions and paths of the characters while also being able to jump in and help where you can. You're also guided by a mysterious figure known as the Storyteller, who acts as your moral guide through the game and looks like he got ripped straight from the prequel Ace Attorney games. Although watching everything through an 80s TV for the aesthetic might be a bit silly, it's a plot device that serves the game well. Something that doesn't work in one story path might be useful in unlocking something else in another path. Your interference or lack thereof can also alter the timeline of the game or open a new path where there might have previously been a dead end. Being outside of the game world allows the developers to give you plenty of real-world information about the history of Japan and the trends and setting of 1980s Showa-era Japan. As you're playing through the game, you'll have a pop-up that indicates new information about a mystery, a person, or even just a random case file. I like this mechanic a lot. It helped to build a world without having to completely stop what you're doing. It's something I wish the Ace Attorney games did a little bit more with the court record files. That's not to say there isn't much mystery to Paranormasight either. While the legend of the 7 mysteries is dipped in occult fascination and wonder, it's definitely not 100% the truth either. They tell you pretty early on that there's between 10 and 15 curses, and the game only really covers 9. You know, you gotta set up for some kind of sequel, maybe. You'll also meet characters outside of your main 3 paths who might not have access to the curse stones but want to use the Rite of Resurrection. It's almost like a game of chicken. Everyone's waiting for the first curse stone to be filled so they can claim the right for themselves. Whether or not that's actually going to be able to happen is another story. The unique thing about Paranormasight is how you also activate each curse. It's usually linked to how the original folktale is passed down, and you'll be given opportunities to use or not use your curse. However, that also means there's ways to stop the curses from activating. One curse in particular essentially screams you to death, but if you turn off the voice volume in the game options, it won't work. Having to actually use something that is mostly just slight tweaks in other games to actively continue your game is a mechanic I loved. It makes sense within the game universe since you're not actively inside of it, but influencing it from outside. I will say the curses being used definitely create some interesting horror visuals. The visual style of Paranormasight is definitely what will draw you into the world, and for good reason. The different environments are based on real-world locations around Honjo. The developers consulted with Sumida government departments to get pictures and aerial shots of each game location and rebuilt them in a 3D space. It reminds me of the effort from Team Bondi to rebuild the post-war 1947 setting of Los Angeles for L.A. Noire, which is probably my favorite Rockstar game. I'm selling myself again on Paranormasight and I've already played it. Anyway, the recreated environments are fully 3D and you can examine them Ace Attorney style, with even having little check marks for question lines or investigation spots you've already exhausted. While you're investigating around Honjo, you'll also be on the hunt for some collectibles. To coincide with the rise of juvenile delinquency and fast-moving trends of the era, there's a popular set of stickers called Mockingbirds. It's mostly just a fun little side quest to find a bunch of bird stickers looking like tough guys. It's silly, and I love it. The environments also do play a cool role in presenting the game as well. When story cutscenes play out, the environment will transform, moving in different camera angles to skew perspective. It helps emphasize certain parts of the story, especially when there's a shift in emotion. But what I like most about the environments is that they don't really detract too much from the story, even with all these little details. That's because the characters in their 2D form are full of expression and emotion. Gen Kobayashi borrows his skills from The World Ends With You to bring the cast of Paranormasight to their best form, and it really shows. Even as normal citizens, every character has some kind of visual identifier that separates them from the rest of the cast. It's maybe not as striking as the character design in Ace Attorney, but it's more realistic. The last big piece of this puzzle that really struck a chord with me was, of course, the music and sound design. Hidenori Iwasaki composed some really great tracks for Paranormasight, and there's a lot of range to enjoy here. From the creepy, brooding title music, the whimsical accordion music of the storyteller, to the gumshoe-inspired crime busting with a smile, the musical motifs are on display here and serve to pinpoint how you should be feeling at certain points in the game. I've got to really commend the sound design team here too. When there's a change needed in the music, you'll know. Trust me. Hard impact and ominous sound effects break up the usual quiet ambiance and Foley, and what helps the sound design is the reactive programming. Playing this game on Nintendo Switch with a Pro controller, I wasn't expecting this game to hit you so hard, but when there's something shocking on screen, your controller will kick you back into the action with a good amount of rumble. It might be an element that's a little bit missing from the PC version, and I wonder maybe there's something similar for the mobile port. This was just sort of something I noticed playing it on Switch, and I thought it was cool. I'm just saying, I made sure to play this game with the lights on. It was a little creepy. Even though I was a little afraid to play this game at night, I still had a lot of fun uncovering the truth behind the 7 mysteries of Honjo. But that doesn't mean there weren't any bumps on the road either. Paranormasight is probably at most a 15-hour game, even with trying to get all the file entries and Mockingbird stickers. At its current price point, it's definitely worth the time, but I feel like with even 5 more hours of story, we could have had a bit more room to expand certain plot points. Without getting into spoiler territory, it felt like certain parts of the game were way too dense, with lots of text and not much puzzle solving. At other story points, things just got rushed way too quickly, and we moved on to something else without really getting time to feel what we just experienced. The terminology in the game could be a bit tricky to navigate, especially when there was a lot of text on screen. Having the file section to refer back to was really helpful, but even something like a quick summary as soon as you pause the game could be helpful, especially if you're breaking up this game in different sessions and you sort of forget what happened the last time you played. I also felt like there could have been more use of these game mechanics I mentioned earlier, rather than just kind of being led along at certain points of the story. But like I said, these were just bumps in the road on a journey I enjoyed a lot, and I'd like to see some of these things changed for a sequel. Fingers crossed for Paranormasight 2. With a ton of history behind it, both real and hyperbolized, Paranormasight: The 7 Mysteries of Honjo had some big shoes to fill. While it unfortunately didn't get as much hype behind it as many other Square Enix titles, the game did a good job of blending the real world with the supernatural to reignite the legacy of ADV for Enix and game producer Takanari Ishiyama. Supported by a solid visual and auditory backdrop, the suspense of the Feast of Shadows kept me playing until the very end. Although it may not have been the smoothest landing, I had a ton of fun with Paranormasight. I'm hoping this video will encourage more people to try it out and support the different releases of the game, so that we might get another game in the series, especially in the Western world, where sometimes visual novels aren't always translated and it's a bit more difficult to access. If you really do enjoy Ace Attorney and other adventure visual novels, I think you'll like what Paranormasight brings to the table. Just be sure to keep the lights on.
Here's another one.
Thanks so much for tuning in for another review. I had a lot of fun with Paranormasight, and with my love of Ace Attorney, I want to show some similarities between the games so that you'll check this out. Again, I want to thank Bowl of Lentils for their work gathering all sorts of information about Takanari Ishiyama, Paranormasight, and all that visual novel fun. I also want to let you know that I am soft launching a Patreon page. I'm going to be doing some more exclusive stuff. If you want to go check that out, it's linked in the description. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope the rest of your day goes well. I'm FalseProof, and I'll see you later. Bye!